In order for us to write the code to move our player, we need to open the player script. To do so, we have two options. We can click our TA Knight and double-click the player option in the script field here in the player component, or we can look in the project pane and double-click player. This will open either Visual Studio or whatever code editing software you have installed on your computer. Your script should now look like this. You'll see the void start and void update methods. We can ignore those for now. We'll interact with those in the next step. To start, we need to give ourselves a little space. So hit enter 2 or 3 times to give yourself some white space to help things look a little more visually pleasing. Next, we need to add a whole bunch of variables which will help control our player's movement and our player's animations. The first thing we want to write is private character controller. And feel free to use, you may see here it says character controller. If you hit enter, it'll fill that out for you. Feel free to use that whenever it's telling you to write the thing you want to write. That exists solely to act as a shortcut so you don't have to type everything out every time. It's called IntelliSense, and it's very, very useful, especially working in Unity. But we'll type private character controller. This will give us a variable that allows us to reference directly to the character controller component that we added in the previous step. Next, we need to add a public boolean or bool called grounded player. This will help us determine if our player is grounded and whether or not we should allow them to jump as such. Next, we need another private variable called a vector3, which will hold our player's velocity. So we'll call it player velocity. Next, we need a variable to hold our walk speed, which will be an integer. Integers are important because they are numerical values that are only whole numbers, meaning that we have no decimals to worry about. We'll know it's always going to be a nice round number. So for this, we'll call it walk speed. And this is the first variable we're going to be assigning a default value to. Default values simply mean that when the code is, or the script is created and the object is brought into the game for the first time, these are the values it will have immediately. If we want to change those, we'll have the option to change them in the inspector, but we want to have something in place now so we can easily test it when the code is done. So for this one, we'll have a default value of 6, and we'll type equals 6. Next, we've got another integer. This time, it will be related to our run speed. Our player is going to be able to run at a faster speed than it can walk. So we'll have another integer, but this one is going to be double the value of our previous one, because we really want the player to feel like they're speeding up when they're using their sprint. So we'll assign a default value of 12. Next, we have another integer. This one is for our sideways speed, which will control how fast we move from left to right. This one appropriately will be named sideways speed, and will also get a value of 12. The next variable might be, you guessed it, another public integer. This time, this one will control how fast our player rotates, so we'll call it rotate speed. This one needs a significantly larger number due to the way that the math works that will handle turning our player. So this one will get a default value of 500. We have another public integer, this time controlling our jump height. So we will appropriately name it jump height. And we'll set this one to a value of 2. Finally, our last public integer is going to represent our gravity. Gravity is obviously important because if the player only jumps once but there's no gravity, they will also very easily float up into outer space, and that's not ideal. So we want to assign a value to gravity value of -75. We've got just a couple more variables we're going to add in this step. The next one being another private animator. So this is going to be a reference to our animator component, the one we just assigned those Boolean values to those states. And this one we can just call animator, or anim, excuse me. We've got 2 more variables. The next one going to be a public game object, referencing an object in our scene titled camera. We'll assign our or I'm sorry, this one will be titled player cam. We'll assign our camera, which is located on our player's prefab, to this. Finally, our last object our last variable is going to be a private float. A float is similar to an int in that it's a numerical value, but floats allow us to store decimal points. This is important when we want to have precision in determining a specific number value. This one is going to just be called speed.